Hey folks, this is Tony Day. Today I wanted to just talk about a few things. This is a new format that I'm going to try out, and we'll see how it goes. I love 35 millimeters as far as lenses are concerned on a full frame camera. What I wanted to do was try a bunch of different 35 millimeter lenses that I was interested in, and then pick what I thought was gonna work best for me. So this isn't exactly going to be a review. It's just going to be kind of me explaining my experience and the stuff I was looking for and why I ended up getting the lens that I picked at the end of it all. Since I love this focal length, I'm okay spending a little bit more than some other people might. If you really love a focal length, you're willing to spend more for it. So, just keep that in mind. I also want to say that I limited myself regarding what lenses I was willing to even try, because there are a lot of third-party lenses that exist, but I have kind of a bias toward Sigma and original brand lenses to a system, because generally speaking, when you're trying to get repairs and that kind of thing, it's easier to get that for better known brands. Okay, so Rokinon, Samyang, Viltrox, like these kinds of lenses for me just don't have the support that I would rather have, and I didn't see a Tamron that was available that would be for the native mount. Okay, so I did limit my options to Sigma and Sony lenses. Okay, so the first lens that I tried out was a Sigma 35mm f1.4 DGDN, and I waited for the Sony E mount native version of the lens. I didn't want the what I mean is I didn't want the HSM version. I wanted whatever they were going to make that was for mirrorless, because they tended to be if you compare the 85mm, for example, the DGDNs tend to be lighter, and they just generally work better on the E mount. So I waited a bit for the 35 1.4 DGDN to come out, and I rented it from Lens Rentals, and I liked it for the most part. There's a few issues with it that I'll go over. Image quality wise, I think for most people it'll be perfectly fine. It's very sharp at 1.4 in most shooting circumstances. The video autofocus worked okay. The photo autofocus was fine, but there's an issue with the lens as far as the image quality is concerned when you try to shoot things close up. And I do that a lot, because if I'm going to have a prime lens, that's my lens that I'm going to use for a bunch of stuff. It's, I don't want to have to switch lenses all the time for either a close-up or a wider shot of things, either out on the street, or if I'm doing a travel thing, or if I'm doing work and I have it on either a gimbal or handheld or on whatever. I want to be able to get close-ups and wider shots without worrying about the image quality deteriorating pretty harshly. And with the DGDN, when you shoot that lens at f1.4 really close up, the image quality suffers. It has a lot of aberrations. It's very soft, ghostly, and all those things. If you're watching this video, you've probably seen more comprehensive reviews of it, and it does have these issues, okay? Just because of those issues, I wasn't really interested in keeping it already. And then with video, I noticed that it had some issues in autofocus. I showed it during a stream. I'm not sure how many people really saw that. But basically what would happen is that depending on how close or far away I was and how much it was having to adjust, it would be kind of slow to react, and the image would look a little weird. I'm not sure if it was my copy of the lens, but it just had these weird things going on with video autofocus that I didn't really like. And I could see it. It was something that would be distracting for me. So it ended up not being a lens for me, unfortunately. So I rented the Sigma 35mm f1.2 DGDN, and I didn't think I would want to rent it, but I saw a lot of videos that were shot with it that looked awesome. And then I also saw a lot of side-by-sides with other 35 millimeters on the mount, and every time I picked the Sigma 1.2, and it didn't matter if it was, stopped down or if it was shot wide open. I just really saw something. It's like that little bit of extra that you might see and other people might not see. That's kind of like an X factor that makes you pick one lens over another, even if the benchmark tests don't really show that, there shouldn't be much of a difference. The first thing that I noticed when I took the Sigma out of the case from Lens Rentals was that it was very heavy, but it's not the heaviest lens I've used. It you know, if you compare it to the 35 millimeter DGDN 1.4 or the HSM 1.4 or the Sony 35 millimeter G Master, you're obviously going to feel the difference, but none of those are 1.2 lenses. And then it's like, okay, well, if you compare to like the Milvis line from Zeiss or the Zeiss Otis line, the weight is not that bad, and it has autofocus by comparison. So if the image quality is at least as good as some of those Zeiss lenses, then I would be like, well, maybe it's worth it, right? So the first image I took with it, I'll show here, and I loved the way that the image looked. I was like, I saw it in camera and I was like, wow, this looks awesome. It's just a, you know, it's just a watering can, no big deal, but it rendered the image in a way that I really, really liked. And it was very much like what I'd seen other people posting. So I couldn't believe how sharp it was, how much contrast was there, the lack of aberrations, you know, and it also looked pretty. So there's a lot of lenses that are like clinically really sharp, but some people may find don't look like they make beautiful shots, if that makes sense. It's one of those things that either you see it or you don't, right? And nobody can really convince you that it's there when you can't see it. So when I looked at this, I was like, okay, this lens looks cool. I took a bunch of other images. I was blown away by the image quality. I thought it looked amazing. I shot a lot of them at 1.2 because, you know, it's cool that you could do that. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the focal length plus shooting at a 1.2 that makes this really cool image come out of it that looks so good to me. But I just loved it. So also I want to point out that the autofocus on my A7R III was pretty good. The animal eye autofocus did not work very well at all. And in fact, I think I only got it to work like once. But the rest of the autofocus settings and all of that were perfectly fine. I didn't have any problems with it. It was a little slower than some other lenses I've used, but it wasn't, you know, the kind of autofocus issues that would actually be a problem when you actually go out and shoot, right? So I took it out for a weekend. I shot it a bunch and I like jumped the gun and I said, oh my God, I'm buying this. Thank you everybody in the Sony FX3 forum for posting so many videos of you using this, because I'm going to get this now. That was a little premature because I tried it in video and there were some problems, okay? If you use continuous autofocus tracking and you're just tracking an object, it works fine. I'll play some videos so you can see that it works fine. It's not like there's any issues with it when you use it just to track an object and you're not switching to different objects or something like that. If you're not doing any rack focusing, the autofocus seems to work perfectly fine. And that's how I'd seen most people using the lens, was in this kind of context. But the thing is, like, I often am, you know, gonna use this to do a rack focus from one thing to another. It looks good when you do it and clients really like it and it looks really fancy. And it's something that I rely on. I want to be able to do rack focuses if I need to, or quickly change focus from one thing to another without there being problems. I want it to be like kind of seamless or look like there's a focus puller doing it as much as I can. The problem with this lens is that if you rack focus with it, the results are very, very poor. I would say they look absolutely horrible in most circumstances. I mean, I even shot at 60 FPS and 120 FPS and you could even see it there. Basically what happens is when you do a rack focus with touch tracking autofocus with any other lens that I've used on E-mount, it just, you know, goes from one thing to another without a bunch of hiccups or problems. It just, and it has kind of a curve to it. So it'll like start out and then it'll increase in speed and then it'll decrease and then it'll kind of settle in. Okay, that's generally how they work. With the Sigma 35mm f1.2 only, it's the only lens I've seen do this. It will do this thing where it will start, it'll increase, then it'll slow down. Then it'll increase and slow down, and increase and slow down, and that's what it does all the way through the focus pull. And it looks terrible. And I'm, you know, showing some examples of that now in a video that I uploaded so that everybody can see the problem that I'm talking about. Even in 60 frames per second, you can see it, and it's really obvious. I don't know why this lens behaves this way. I'm not the only one to show that it does this, so I know that it's not a copy variation issue. It makes it where using that kind of functionality is just not going to be useful for me. So let's say that you're going to do rack focusing manually because this isn't going to work out, right? Like you're not going to be able to do touch tracking autofocus. It would be nice if it worked, but it doesn't. You switch it over to manual focus and try it again. It's worse. And I'll explain. It has this focus throw that is really hard to predict. It's either super slow, or when you try to accelerate it, it speeds up too fast sometimes. If you try to go slower, it's like way too slow again. And so what I was having happen when I tried to manually focus the lens is that it would be too slow. I'd try to pick it up, I'd overshoot it, and then I'd undershoot it coming back, and then I'd overshoot it, and then I'd undershoot it, and it was just a nightmare. I absolutely 100% hated using the manual focus on this lens. In my opinion, if you're a video shooter and you plan to get lenses that are going to work in both like autofocus context and then like for your manual focus, for whatever that reason might be, you should not buy the Sigma 1.2. It is not reliable. And I say that because if the autofocus for some reason in the shot you're trying to get isn't working, you need to be able to fall back on manual focus. It's something that you really need to be able to do to be sure that your lenses will be in operation for a shoot and you're not going to have a bunch of major issues. Okay. The lens should at least be useful in some contexts with manual focus, and this lens just isn't, not in my opinion and my experience. So, you know, I would say if you're a video user, don't buy it. It's bad. Try it out, of course. If you don't believe me, go rent it, try it yourself. But for video, man, like I would not buy it, which is a bummer. So that left me with the Sony 35mm f1.4 G Master, and I bought that lens eventually. That is the lens for me. Okay, I'm using it right now, and it's a phenomenal lens for a lot of reasons. First of all, the optics are near perfect, I would say. The only real problems with it are heavy vignetting when you shoot wide open. I would expect that with a lot of fast aperture lenses. But the thing is that there's a lot of corrections you can do either in camera or in post. So this isn't the biggest deal breaker for me, and it's never been that much of a problem. I often add vignetting anyways when I'm shooting wide open. So this was not that big of a problem for me. Maybe for some other people it will be, but if you stop it down to like f2.8, f4, that kind of thing, you're going to get much better performance as far as vignetting. The sharpness from like all of the useful parts of the frame is going to be perfectly pin sharp. The contrast is amazing. Like it has a lot of contrast in it, like a lot, visibly more contrast than the 35mm f1.2 Sigma. It's visibly more. It has a lot of micro contrast, more than the 1.2 Sigma. For photography, it's like a no-brainer. The autofocus is really fast and accurate. Video autofocus is near perfect. It does not have the issues that the 35mm f1.2 Sigma does when it has the focus pulls, using rack focusing, using the autofocus. The manual focus, I'll tell you, on G Master lenses, manual focus, it's exactly the way it needs to be on these electronic focusing lenses. Sony's knocking it out of the park when it comes to making hybrid focused lenses. So, you know, I have no complaints as far as optical quality. It's fantastic. I have no complaints as far as the build quality. It's lighter. It's lighter than the Sigma 35 f1.2 by a significant amount. Basically, in all photography contexts, this lens is a total winner. The issue with this lens for video is the focus breathing. There are things that you can do to mitigate that in post. Sometimes you can fix it entirely. Sometimes it is like, just kind of making it better and not necessarily fixing it completely. But the really cool thing about the G Master lenses is that Sony's newer bodies seem to be adding in focus breathing compensation, which I think is great. I think that that's something that every brand should offer in their cameras. So, you know, this was just me explaining my journey. You really should just go and rent these lenses yourself to make a decision. I find that that's the best way to do it. You can watch all the reviews in the world, but until you've got the lens in your hand and you test it out and you see the results for yourself, you really aren't really going to know whether or not it's going to work for you. Okay. So, but if you really want me to just tell you something about these, that is the biggest takeaway. The first thing is that the 35mm f1.4 DGDN Sigma is good, I think, for most people who are shooting photos. I think you'll be perfectly fine with it, except for really close up, wide open kind of photography. If that's your thing, it's definitely not going to be the best for you. The Sigma 35 f1.2, if you're shooting portraits of people and don't mind the weight, I think that has the best overall image quality as far as shooting that kind of thing. But I definitely would not buy it if you're a video maker. It is just going to be a hassle if you ever have to use manual focus or do rack focusing using autofocus. Unless there's some kind of firmware update that came out that came after I borrowed it. And then the G Master, that for me is the best out of all three of the ones that I've tried in an overall sense. It has incredible image quality. Everything is great about it except for the focus breathing. The focus breathing is the biggest problem, but if you can fix it in post or you have focus breathing compensation, then that's not really a problem anyways. So that's really it. I hope that you got something from this. If you would like to support the channel, please go to patreon.com/TonyDay. You can sign up there to support it, and you can also like and subscribe if you like this content and you want to see more of it. All right, so that's really it, and I will see you later.